Okay. All right. So, this was a versus AI match. So going in, tell me a little bit about your plan, or were you kind of
Okay.
just doing stuff?
So, like, what I had in mind was I was going to I was going to scout because
Mm-hmm.
the AI was on random, so I had no idea what they were playing.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, let me check the
It was
replay. I'm
ZVZ,
pretty,
so
yeah, I knew it was Zerg versus Zerg. And so, uh, I needed to check that out before did anything. And
sure.
then by the time I got there, pretty sure, like, they had already made units.
Okay.
And so at that point, I was just like panicking and just
Okay.
trying to like make a defense, and it kind of
Okay.
worked.
All right. So, yeah, and we can kind of look over some of that. Wait, I double clicked it. There we go. So let's take a look. Uh, yeah. I noticed there's that, like I said, I've got a couple notes already to take a look at this. So first, one of the sort of early things I noticed was our, like, how quickly we take this gas.
Okay, so I do it too quickly.
Well, it's no decision is either right nor wrong inherently. Getting an
Okay,
early gas means you will have gas early, which means you're not getting other things. So the important thing is to make sure that you are doing things with purpose. So if you have like something you're going for for an early tech play, gas first is fine. If you're not planning on using your gas for a little bit, probably better to delay the gas.
okay,
But like I said, it all comes back to like what our plan is. I think right now, since you're kind of like in a very sort of in a place where you're not necessarily having like a solid plan. You're not saying like I'm trying to rush mutas, I'm trying to rush infestors, I'm trying to rush roaches. Like there isn't
no,
really
yeah,
a thing where you're specifically going for that. So
I'm like sort of trying to get roaches early, but that's like not incredibly on the top
yeah.
of my list.
So something else was that we go gas first, then we go expansion. So what this says too is that we are looking at a lot of drones being needed to fully staff our expansion as well as our main base and this gas geyser before we have a spawning pool, which means we don't have a queen yet.
Okay,
So I would probably say, like, again, like if we're going for this, if we're going for like a fast tech, like that's fine, but we probably want a spawning pool before we expand.
gotcha.
So if we decide we want to delay this gas, maybe you go expansion first. That would be
Okay,
fine. I mean, any of these things is fine. It's just depending on like it's. So I'm gonna step back for a second. So we have essentially the way you can kind of break down a strategy for your play is you have your. Are you familiar with the 3-act method of storytelling?
not really.
Okay, so
Wait, like
basically like when you're like reading a book or you're watching a movie, it's very common in movies very often use the 3-act method.
oh, actually, I think I know what you're talking about. It's
Okay.
like the intro, like
Yeah.
kind of climax, and then
Right, so
yeah.
you got the start where we're just kind of introducing the characters, which the reason we do that is so that we have investment in the struggle, which is act 2. And then that is kind of the bulk of the film, is really that is involved with them in the struggle, and then that comes to a head as we transition into the 3rd act, which is the climax where we have the resolution. When you're planning a strategy, it's very similar. So a lot of times when you're writing, you will kind of like, you're like, I'm going to write a book about, let's use Harry Potter as as an example. So you have an idea one day that you're going to write a book about kids that attend a magic school. Like, that's where you start. You actually start in the middle, typically. So you'll start in the middle, you go, we're going to do this, and then you kind of like go, okay, well, how do we get to this middle bit? Okay, well, we have this character, Harry Potter. He is going to be someone who doesn't understand this world at all. This will give our viewers and readers a chance to kind of understand this very different world from their own and kind of give them an in. And so now we have this way to transition from the start to the middle, and then we need a way to figure out, okay, well, how do we bring this to a conclusion? And so in our strategy here, like, for instance, if you're saying like our general play is roaches, if our general mid game is roaches, then we want to figure out how do we get to roaches. And that could be one base play, that could be two base play. It's just kind of how you want to like play off of that. If you want to play a very aggressive style with your roaches, you could go one base roaches and just rush to get those roaches, get like 6 or 7 roaches and attack, and then play off of that. If you want to play a more economic style of mid-game roaches, then you go for this two base play, and then what you're doing from there is you're looking to use your roaches to give you space to set up a third base, which will give you deeper into the macro game, yada yada. Now from there you'll have to figure out like how do we transition from this roach based mid game out into like a way to break a stalemate usually.
Right.
Now a lot of StarCraft games don't really do Act 3. Typically someone will zoom out ahead in the mid game. Something will happen in the mid game that will cause it to become obvious that one player is going to win. Like no matter what happens, 99% chance red guy wins. So blue guy just says, I concede.
Okay.
But still, like when we're thinking about like what we're doing, like that's a really nice place to start. So I don't want to tunnel too much on it, but so like one of the things that we could be doing with our roach play is like if we say like, okay, well we want to have a more economic game, then you might want to get this hatchery first and then go spawning pool and then start building your queens, make a couple zerglings just to protect yourself, and maybe you flood with drones first and then like get a bunch of gas all at once as you transition into your roach mid game. That isn't necessarily the way you should do it. I'm not prescribing a specific way to do it. This is just a potential way to get to that mid game.
Gotcha.
So yeah. But yeah, generally speaking though, I will say that like whenever you get a resource, we're looking to use that soon. Now if you only get one gas, so if you actually hang on a second, I want you to control, well, do you see something come up right now?
No.
Okay, press Control A.
Control A.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So this brings up a nice little comparison slider here, and we can keep this up for a little bit here because I think this is pretty important. So your opponent is one basing throughout like this entire time, and part of the reason why we're kind of in the way we are is if we so press E, and then take a look at the lower left.
Lower left.
Yeah. So just look at the blue guy's base.
Oh yeah.
So he's got his queen out, right? So he's pumping the injects and getting a bunch of larvae that way. Now you have two bases. Well, you have two hatcheries. It's important to say you have two hatcheries because, well, your second hatchery hasn't even popped yet. But like this hatchery, like this base, stays like no drones for an extended period of time. So this is one of the things that we kind of like we end up, because we delay our spawning pool for this gas geyser. We end up with this situation where now we don't have our queen to pump out a bunch of larvae, so we don't have those larvae turn into drones to then populate this second base.
Okay.
So you're going to see here that we will actually stay pretty even. In fact, I'm actually going to speed things up. Look at the red versus blue on the bottom. Like we stay really even on drones, which means that while we have two bases, our economy is basically the same. Pretty much all down to the fact that we're, I mean, there's macro stuff here too, obviously, just getting your timings down on building. That's fine. But like there's also like the impact of like how the structures are being used is kind of coming into this as well. So now that said, like your two bases eventually kind of like it kind of pays off. You do stock your other base as well. You know, he is still on one base, so eventually your larva is he's starting a second hatchery now. So like you are able to catch up, but there was a time period there where like if he had just attacked early, it would have been very difficult for you to hold off. You probably would have lost a bunch of stuff, and he probably could have crippled you and just ended it.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of like what I would say there is about like kind of thinking about like how we're going to approach like managing our economy and such. So always think about like if you're going to build a second base, it's very important to make sure that we know that we can actually stock it. Obviously you're new. I don't expect you to just know this stuff via just playing the game a couple times. But yeah, so basically what I would say is queens are very important, so we want to make sure we have a spawning pool relatively quickly. But yeah, it should be one of our earliest buildings. So something else I noticed, which this is just kind of like how we're kind of going through, right? So if we're playing two bases, this likely means that we are trying to set up an economic long game. Especially if we start it pretty early.
Right.
Whereas if you start two bases early and you mine them out, and then you don't expand past that, then you're still playing a short game. But you're investing in economy early and then playing a short game over a slightly longer. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of odd, right? So yeah, and one thing you'll notice in because you said you played a little bit during Wings of Liberty days, right?
Yeah, that was that was very
long time. I understand, but the point is that changes have happened since then, so there might be some residual things that like aren't really clicking yet. Mineral patches are much smaller than they used to be, so you will mine bases out much more quickly now than you would. Well, also they start you off with more workers, so you're also mining much more earlier, but the mineral patches are smaller. You will mine bases out much faster. Not to say you're going to mine your main base out 100% of the time in like every single match and it's going to be a problem, but the point is you really want to make sure you're kind of like getting ahead of that. So one of the things that will like that getting this big army will do, it does like two things, right? It allows you to attack your opponent, which is what we want to do, right? We want to attack our opponent and kill him. But like if we go down to the lower left and we try to push and we realize, oh, we can't actually push him for whatever reason, if we just kind of like still kind of stay out and kind of maintain pressure on the map to prevent them from coming at us, that gives us a window to get a third up, to get a fourth up. So we can just start getting more and more bases and get more and more economy. So something else is that if we are going to be on two bases and we can see that like we're trying to go for an early, like a mid-game critical mass, where we're saying like, okay, we're going to go all in at like maybe the 10-minute mark. Like we're literally just gonna we're gonna mass up 10-minute timing attack. We're gonna push in and try to kill him in 10 minutes, and we're gonna focus hard on that 10-minute mark. So if you say that, and so you don't need 3 bases necessarily, because you don't need to mine at 3 bases, but what you can do is you can build what's called a macro hatch. So a macro hatch is where you just build another hatchery just in your other base, and you just keep it next to your other hatchery, and that way you just get more larvae, and that will let you spend a bunch of your money really, really quickly. And instead of investing into drones for that next base, you're investing all of your larvae and all of your resources into just churning out that many more units, trying to get that critical mass where you're trying to build up enough army to just steamroll your opponent quickly. Gotcha. But if you're not looking to turn that corner and go all in like at a specific time, just keep expanding when you can. Okay. So yeah. All right. So I'm gonna go back to your view, and I'm gonna play it out from here. So actually, so I think, you know what? Unit composition doesn't matter yet. We'll talk about unit composition later. Right now, so making this is like the worst. It's not the worst. Nothing is the worst. So this is kind of fine. So, this is perfect. So there's something about this that's actually really, really good. So if you see the engagement right here, you have your roaches, and they're all in this nice little line, but their roaches are all bunched up. So what that's going to mean is that the blue roaches in the back, can't shoot because they don't have range enough to shoot past their friends to hit your guys. But your guys, because they're all surrounding them, they can all shoot the enemy, but not all of theirs can hit you. So this is an engagement that we really like. We really like this engagement because this means that we have lots of surface area on them where we're all firing and they're not all firing. So like there's a diagram that someone did where 13 Marines are shown how they can kill like 18 Marines just by having the proper surround. Weird. Yeah. So it all comes down to the fact that the guys in the back can't get close enough to your people to actually fight them. Right. Now, I say surround, I do not mean literally a circle around them. That's probably too much. But if you can get a nice concave where you're taking up like 90 degrees onto them, yeah, you will 100% win that. Well, unless they just have so much more stuff than you that you just can't churn through it all. Generally speaking, you will win. You will win much more of those fights than you will win of the other variety. So there's also other things you can do. Like, see this really low. Wait, there's like a half health roach. Yeah, there's like a half health roach in there. So if you see that like one of your roaches is getting like to about half, and you're like, because right now you're like, your camera's like on these guys, so like I know you're paying attention to them. So if you just like, as you're just watching the fight like that, if you're going to be involved, look for somebody who's getting low, left click them, and then just right click them back. Oh, okay. And then you can literally just attack move them back in, because what'll happen is the AI of the other units will stop firing at the thing that's now out of range, and it'll pick a new target. And when the low health unit comes back into the fight, they won't reprioritize that. The AI won't anyway. A player might realize what's going on and they might tell everything to focus fire it, but AI won't do it. So yeah, this is just like a little micro thing that you can do to kind of keep your roaches alive a little bit longer and win out some more additional fights. Gotcha. This chase is kind of fine. And then also this is also fine. This disengages because your roach counts were like pretty similar, so it's a little bit kind of a coin toss as to like whose would end up kind of winning out. It probably would have come down to like just AI targeting probably at that point, if I was gonna guess. Okay, so yeah, we're getting our stuff. I'm gonna speed things up a little bit. So the next thing I want to really talk about is how we're
this
gonna.
This is like my main attack, like the big one that I'm going for. Yeah, like, my idea was here to like wipe out their drones, so I can like get a resource advantage at the time that I have with that.
That makes sense. What's unfortunate is this. So you know how we talked about the surround the concave? Yep. This choke does the exact same thing. It takes all of these roaches and like I'm selecting like I don't know like 20-ish. It's no, these are 8. So these are about 25. Like 16. Oh. Well, I'm the ones I'm selecting are like yeah. So it's like it's about 18 roaches, that are just never gonna fire until the ones in the front are dead. And meanwhile, this itty bitty group of roaches over here, this like 10 roaches or whatever, like these 10 roaches are gonna kill your 18. Because of that.
So going around the other way would be better.
Yeah, so that's where if we if you want to try to push through this, like that's fine, but like the second you go up here and realize that they're here, you get out. Or like let's say the other route doesn't exist. Kill this debris. Okay. Just sit over to the right and kill this debris. Now you've got this giant area open, and now your larger force has a much better chance of getting in.
Right, because then if they try to push me while I'm breaking the debris, they get bumped.
Exactly. Yeah, because then you get to use the choke, right? Because if you're shooting the debris and they try to push down the ramp, you just freaking go at them, because then you can get a surround onto them as they're trying to push through the choke. Right. So it's perfect. But all in all, that's kind of fine. How is our supply doing? You are staying ahead of your supply cap, so that's pretty decent. Your money's getting kind of spent, so that's kind of okay. It's not too bad. Okay. You're getting upgrades. You're doing things. Yeah, I think pretty much. Yeah, you really do. Yeah, I think pretty much from here. Yeah, you get the economic damage. We get the Mutalisk kind of coming. It's pretty much it's kind of a snowball from here, I would probably say.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I would think that like basically like the kind of like some of the big takeaways that I would have are. Okay. Phraseology. So basically, like, to kind of like sum up, like when we're kind of like figuring out like what our building order is going to be, so like we're gonna get this structure, then this structure, then this structure, then this structure, like how we kind of leapfrog through our plan to get to where we want to be.
Oh, sure.
We want to be purposeful. And then when it comes to our micro, I think we just saw some really good examples of like both like good engagements, bad engagements.
Right.
So I think that like that'll definitely help you out as well. So maybe we do. Yeah, I think we have time to talk about. We could talk about unit composition. So roaches, right? So roaches, one of their like they're really great at being they're armored units. You know, they have a little bit of range. They can tank a lot of damage. Their weaknesses kind of being that without the speed upgrade, they're kind of slow. With speed, they're really good, obviously. They can potentially, like, you could potentially sneak some roaches in places with tunneling claws. If you have burrow and tunneling claws, you can potentially do some like harassment type stuff. That's a bit risky. I probably would only do that against Protoss players who are like skimping on detection, because burrowed units can be seen if they're near a detector, which like missile turrets, overseers, photon cannons, observers, they're all detectors.
Right.
So a lot of times, at least. Now, granted, there's a lot of stuff that's like new to Legacy of the Void, which Legacy of the Void is not new, but there's a lot of things that kind of like came up there, which is different from when I was playing it. But when I was playing it, typically like a big like sort of look, you tended to play roaches with hydralisks, and a lot of that comes down to what makes roaches good, what makes hydralisks bad. So hydralisks are really squishy, but they do a lot of damage. And so the sort of way that you mitigate their weakness is you put a bunch of roaches in front of your hydras. Your hydras are longer range than your roaches, so your roaches will naturally go to the front. Your hydras will naturally go to the back, and the roaches will the hydras will shoot over the roaches, and you get a really nice ranged ground-based army. We can do a decent amount of damage. The roaches take all the damage. It's great.
Do the hydralisks attack air?
Hydralisks will attack air, yes. So they hit ground and air. A lot of times when you're using Mutalisks are pretty bad in a straight up fight. Now I say this as my initial plan, the reason I played Zerg in the first place was the Mutalisk. I love the Mutalisk. The Mutalisk is great. It's a fantastic unit. But in a head-to-head matchup, the Mutalisk is really bad.
Right.
It's a very fragile damage-dealing unit. It's fairly short range, and it does actually surprisingly little damage. It does bounce. The glaive will bounce around. So once you get to a critical mass of Mutalisks, yeah, they'll wreck pretty much like anything if you have enough of them.
Right.
But what they're primarily sort of used for is they tend to be used for harassment. So if you like get like maybe 4 or 5 mutas, you could typically fly those into your opponent's mineral lines, pick off a worker or two, and get out. And what this harassment will do is it'll force them to either invest resources in static defenses, which suck, or or it'll cause them to pull their army back from whatever else it was they're doing, not to mention it'll take your opponent's attention away. which is
right.
always really good because the less attention they have to spend on other things, the better. Zerglings are very similar to Mutalisks in that they're fast, pretty good at harassment if you can get them into places. And both of these units will end up giving you phenomenal map control because they're so quick that you can respond almost anywhere immediately. So a lot of times Lings and Mutas go together, but there's other reasons too, and that being that Mutas are really gas intensive. So they will eat up a lot of your gas if you're producing them really well. So what you'll usually end up having to do when you have a gas heavy play style is you'll end up having to just produce a bunch of Zerglings because you want to make sure that you're spending all of your resources that you can and that you're spending all of your larvae. Because it doesn't do anybody any good if you just have all these larvae sitting around, they're not becoming units. So like that's where another thing where it's like it's not just the fact that these units kind of go together, but they also go together economically as well. Because then the Zerglings eat up all the money. Now kind of the transition out of there. So one of the other sort of issues playing now, not to say that you never play Ling Roach or Ling Roach Hydra or even Ling Hydra. These things are all perfectly viable, but like there are things about those unit compositions that are like a little bit unfortunate if you're in that position. So Zerglings are melee units. So when you upgrade their damage, you're upgrading the melee attack. But then your Roaches and your Hydralisks are ranged units, so they need the ranged attack upgrade. So if you're getting upgrades, it's less efficient to have to train all these different sorts of things. Whereas if you have a more cohesive sort of thing, like for instance, a decent transition but a decent transition, late game transition, if you're playing a lot of Lings, is you get your Hive, you go Adrenal Glands out of your spawning pool, and then you go to Ultralisks. Now the problem with this, if you're playing Ling Ultra, is it only ever hits ground and only ever at melee range. So that has its own weaknesses. You'll need to shore up in some other way. But yeah, a lot of times it's, especially when you're trying to think about this, like about the game pretty much around like the mid game, a lot of times having a nice clean core to it. Like I was reading some things today too about like, okay, how does Zerg, like how are we currently dealing with like a meching Terran? And Ling Hydra seems to be a way that people are dealing with it. Sometimes the units are strong enough against your opponents that the inherent mismatch is fine. But I mean, Ling Muta has a mismatch too, right? You're upgrading air weapons at the same time you're upgrading ground melee. But it's just, if we're doing this style where we've got ranged ground, we've got melee ground, and we've got air units, then we're like upgrading all these different things, and it's like, how are we managing all this? So the other thing too about it is that I really like strategies, especially when we're just trying to like learn and kind of grind that macro. Get a nice simple strat. Like, just remove as much as possible. Just use like what is the least number of things I could do that will achieve me my goal. So if you would like, I mean, pick whatever you want. Like if you want to go with the Roaches, like we can try to like make a plan around the Roaches. If you want to go for like the Mutas and like the Lings, we can help you try to like figure out how to do like a Speedling opening into like a 2-base Mutalisk play. It doesn't really matter. Just pick one, I would say, and then we can kind of go from there. Does one sort of interest you more than the other? Like the Roach Hydra play tends to be a little bit slower. It tends to be a little bit more stronger, like more resilient. Whereas like Ling Muta requires like a little bit more input from you because they're fast, so you gotta constantly be like moving them around and running away from things.
Well, it would be better to learn like would it be better to learn like Ling Muta for like skill cap, or would it be better to learn like the
so like I said, like I actually started on Ling Muta, and I learned other things after that. But so what I would say, like personally, the way I always look at it is like whatever is more interesting to you and seems more fun, pick that. Like it kind of doesn't matter what you pick. Like, yeah, Ling Muta like sort of demands that you have like better APM, but like that's fine. You even if you like poorly mismanage your like Lings and Mutas, if you're still pumping out your macro, you're gonna make enough stuff, and then you can start worrying about working on your micro and controlling your Mutalisks properly. Like I honestly, if you just make a bajillion Mutalisks and a bajillion Zerglings and you lose them all to a single like seeker missile, I don't care. Like it's like we'll build you the numbers first, get you the muscle memory to actually like macro properly. Right. Then we'll worry about army control. So
okay.
So whatever's more interesting to you, is fine.
Yeah, I'd probably prefer like in that case then Ling Muta.
Ling Muta? Okay.
I feel like I'm more input based in how I want to play it.
That sounds great. Okay, so we're looking for a pretty like high tempo harassy play style, which is fun.
Right.
So, okay, well, I'm gonna cut the recording here, so then we can take a look at that. So,
sounds great.